All right, guys. I know y'all were out the last 2 days, but I asked y'all to make sure to check Schoology and not get behind because you're in an AP class and you can't afford to get behind. That said, if you did not complete the assignments from day 29 and 30 of Schoology, I will give you till Friday at 1 p.m. to get those in. Part of it was the notes, most of it, and there were a couple small quizzes. I know there's a math quiz and a couple SQs and I think one data set. So, from what I hear, it wasn't as much homework as some other people gave you around the school. So, we're going to go through and hit the high points on the notes today so you guys don't get behind on that. There's not anything incredibly complicated. And then hopefully we'll be back on track by tomorrow. We got behavioral ecology, and then Friday, hopefully we start population ecology. Yesterday we were supposed to start a transpiration, sorry. Been out of the loop too long. So we were supposed to start a Transpiration Lab on Tuesday where we get some plants and we check those for a week and we expose them to different treatments to see the effects of transpiration. But unfortunately, we weren't here, and I went and got some plants last night. And the only ones I could find, the bottoms of them where the soil was completely frozen. So they were on sale at Lowe's, so I bought them and brought them home and forgot to bring them this morning. So I'll bring them tomorrow if they haven't all wilted and died after they thawed out. And so hopefully we'll be able to start the Transpiration Lab tomorrow, okay? And then that'll be a week-long lab. For those of you at home in class, bless you, you guys will be working on that online, and we'll post the data every day, and you guys will have to use someone else's data for that. So today we start transition. Yes, we hear you, Rooster. I guess the chickens didn't all freeze to death. From aquatic to terrestrial biomes. Now, also, don't forget, tomorrow you guys are supposed to have your ecosystem brochure completed and in the discussion board. Yes? I'll take that as late as tomorrow night. So how many of y'all finished that? Y'all are such slackers. Hopefully you've got most of the information, most of what you need, and you can finish that and get it posted to Schoology. That's an easy 50 or 60 point grade there. And I will do my best today to get grades caught up. I came up here last night and worked a little bit up through your test and progress check, and I think we had one lab from last week too. So I'll try to get all that updated today. But like I said, you got that lab project, you got a couple small quizzes. But that lab should be a very easy grade for you guys. And if you are missing something, then I'll suggest that you get that to me pronto, okay? Any questions? Super. Transition to life, important concepts. All life forms are mostly water, therefore affected by sunlight intensity. How much water are we made of? 70-ish, yeah, just depends on how dehydrated you are. Roughly 70, and that's a lot of organisms. Some go up to like 90 or 95% water, but that's very important in our function. We said water serves for two main reasons. What are they? What does water do for us? All right, helps to regulate temperature. It's able to absorb a lot of heat. It's able to give off heat. And then water also is used for move waste and nutrients, yes, around our bodies. So those are two very important things water are used for. Number two, water helps regulate temperature of the earth for most organisms. So we said bodies of water on earth make up about 75% of the earth, including the lakes and oceans and ponds and streams and everything else. And so it helps to absorb a lot of heat, give off heat, helps to maintain a more stable temperature. Number three, gene expression is involved in all organismal developmental processes and controlled by enzymes. So in terms of going from organisms that live in the water to ones that live on land, that's a big transition, and you've got to do some things in order to be able to do that. If you're in the water all the time, you're not worried so much about water loss. If you're on land away from water, then that's something you have to account for. So we're going to go through and we'll talk about some of the issues that happen as that transition from like fish to amphibian to reptile, bird, and mammal takes place. All right, and also we'll talk about some plant issues here as well, because plants, it's the same thing. There's a lot of photosynthetic organisms in the water, and that's very different if you're on land, especially where it's dry. Under section 1, sunlights and ecosystems. Good. Number 1, Carter.
Sunlight is used to power photosynthesis by producers, as well as keep the earth warm enough to support life. Okay,
we need the sun. It helps to warm us. It helps to regulate all of the cycles on Earth, because the movement, like the water cycle, the carbon, phosphorus, nitrogen, all those are, their movement, wind, is regulated by the sun. Let's see what else. Helps producers. Number 2, sunlight intensity is a major force behind the different biomes and ecosystems found on Earth. The intensity of sunlight mixed with wind patterns of Earth can be seen in Hadley cell models. Now, we already talked about Hadley cell models, right? Okay, so Hadley cell models, turn back to 1165. Well, we already looked at that one. Hold on. So I think Hadley cells on 1160 here. Real quick review. This is the model that says basically most of the moisture on Earth is going to stay where? No, that's not it. It's over it. Most of the Earth moisture is going to stay near the equator. That's where most of our, what ecosystems? Tropical rainforests are found. Okay, and basically what it says is as most of the sun hits the equator, warm, moist air rises, and as it goes up, then a lot of that, as it goes up, it gets cooler, it's going to condense, it's going to fall back to Earth, and once that takes place, then most of that moisture kind of hangs around the equator. And then as more of that air heats up and continues to push the drier parts where the water is not anymore, pushes it out. That's why you find deserts in your 20 to 30 degrees north and south range. And if you flip over to 1165, we've got a map of the biomes. Now, you'll notice here, the brown areas, those are your deserts, and then the green areas in the middle, those are your tropical rainforests. And then we've got some other green areas. We'll talk about other different types of forests. But you can see those deserts are pretty much located in that subtropic to tropic range, 20 to 30 degree range above the subtropics, where you have the deserts like the Gobi, the Sahara, most of your Middle Eastern countries, and then the desert southwest. And then also in the southern hemisphere, you can see most of Australia being a desert there. So, any questions so far? Water, it's important. It's found in different locations for different reasons. Number 1 under sunlight intensity. Light intensity is greatest at the equator, causing massive evaporation of water. And like we said, it evaporates, it goes up, and then it rains back down. About half the water in the rainforest comes from where? It's estimated about half the rain, well, I said water, half the rain in the rainforest comes from where? Well, I guess, yeah, half of it's going to come from the ocean's evaporation, and the other half's going to come from the trees. So the trees are producing lots of water through putting lots of water in the air through what process? Transpiration, yeah. So most of the time in your book, it's going to call it evapotranspiration, because it's like evaporating from the trees as the water comes out. So when you see that term evapotranspiration, that's just talking about transpiration of water from the different trees and plants. So in the rainforest, that's a very important component of the rainfall there. And what happens if you cut all the trees and get rid of them? Less rain. And there's less rain. Yeah. When we were in Ecuador in 2009, it was very evident to me when we would drive through places that the rainforests had been cut down for farming and agriculture, that you get out and look around for stuff, and it was hotter and drier than when you would go a few miles down the road and you would go through through a forested area, and it was much more humid and not quite as hot. It was still pretty warm. And you could see that tangible difference in the humidity. So if you don't have the plants there to help hold part of that moisture, then you're going to lose that moisture, and you're going to eventually you'll see changes in those ecosystems, which they're worried very much about now, especially with the Amazon, because there's a big transition to agriculture. I know in apes, a couple months ago, we watched a video on how there is a big governmental push for expansion of agriculture into the rainforest. And so y'all probably heard the whole like rainforest is on fire last year in the news. So a lot of that has to do with agricultural fires and development. All right.
Why did that? This is kind of a random question, but why do they want it? And why do they want agriculture in the rainforest so much?
Well, the government's all about making money and power, and so the agricultural industry kind of props up the Brazilian government for the people that are in charge, and so they're normally lands that would be allocated for parks and preserves and for natives to have, people that have always lived there, places that are basically just wild places that they live on. Then those are the things that are protecting them. Basically, the agencies and whatnot, they're defunding them, and they're letting people come in either illegally or legally in some cases, and come in and clear those areas out and start massive farming industry.
Because it's cheap to do it that way?
Yeah, I mean, it's more land, yeah. So the more land you get, the warmer it is, the more you can grow. Eventually, though, I think they're going to run into some major issues in terms of clearing off, and I don't know if they'll ever be able to get back to where we were in terms of the rainforest that we had. So that's a big concern.
Like humans do, we'll probably realize that after we do.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a little too late at some point. It's getting pretty bad, though. Let's move on. Tropics, 23.5. Remember, 23.5 degrees is also what other degree or angle? Yeah, it's the tilt of the Earth. The tilt of the Earth causes seasons. All right, tropics are at 23.5 degrees are deserts due to high light intensity, little water availability, and high evaporation. So anywhere from about that 20 to 30 degree range, north and south of the equator, that's where most of your deserts are found. And like I say, there are exceptions to this. We are at roughly, I want to say 33 or 34 degrees north, as well as like if you go anywhere in Florida, and obviously that's not desert, but we get lots of moisture out of the Gulf, so we have a little bit different situation. All right. Sunlight, temperature, and water regulation in plants. Part A, read that for us, Abigail.
Plants require sunlight and water to power energy production in the process of photosynthesis.
Keep going.
The process of photosynthesis yields the energy stored macromolecules of carbohydrates.
Okay, so we need light for photosynthesis, and that's what drives all light on Earth, light and water. Part B, sunlight is also responsible for directing plant growth. Number 1, plants release hormones, auxins, in the apical meristem of shoots. Now, let's turn to page 841 real quick. We're going to skip around quite a bit. There's not really a unit just on plants in AP Bio, so we're going to have to kind of incorporate that into what we do in class with the ecology section. I don't know how much y'all got in 9th grade bio, but we're going to get a little bit here, not a whole lot. You have to join the garden club if you want to learn much more. All right, auxins. Auxins are a plant hormone. Hormones do what? Well, in this case, they do stimulate growth. Yeah, they're just signal molecules. So we have hormones that we talked about that go all throughout our body and send signals to help control different activities going on. And the same thing in plants. One, I think we mentioned auxins a little bit earlier in the year when we were going over hormones, but we didn't spend much time on it. But anyway, hormone auxin is released at the apical meristem of the shoots. So that's where like the stems of the plant are going out. So where new growth is taking place. Okay. Now, there's some different growth factors that are taking place here. The auxins travel down the dark side of the plant and thus stimulate the cells to elongate at a greater rate than the light side. So what we're talking about here is if you have a plant, like we put a plant in the window over there, that plant, if we plant something, it's going to start to grow. And which way is it going to go? Towards the light. It's going to bend that way. So this is actually what causes the bending of the plant. Okay? So it's not like the plant has muscles like we do that can contract and just move it over. So what has to happen is, let's say the light's over that way. The cells on this side, they're going to have to elongate and spread out. And as they get bigger and these stay the same, what's going to happen? It's gonna, as these stretch out, it's gonna cause that plant to move over this way, okay? So, if you're looking, this is an experiment, actually, Charles and Francis Darwin did this experiment, which is, I think, pretty interesting. We always think of Darwin in the context of just studying evolution, but there was more to him than that, Carter. So here's the experiment. You should look it up. Charles and Francis Darwin. I think that's his son. Yeah, Francis is his son. No judgment out there. Could be, I think, an either or name though, right?
Yeah.
Let's see here.
Like Sam.
Yes, I have a friend who married a Sam. The auxins travel down the dark side of the plant. So when you've got a plant that's growing toward the light, the auxins are going to travel down the side of the plant away from the light, okay? And cause a greater rate of growth on this side of the plant, cause the cells to really elongate and stretch out. The unequal growth causes the plant to bend over toward the light. That type of that type of growth is called what? When you're growing toward the light? Phototropism. Photo means light. Tropism refers to a turning movement. Now, there are other types of tropisms. A couple that you may be familiar with. I don't know if they list them in here. We'll just talk about them real quick. You can add them in. Gravidotropism. What is that? Let's say you're a plant, you're growing on a hillside, and the hillside kind of like some of the dirt collapses and moves down. Instead of a plant like this, now you're facing this way. What's going to happen to you? Which way do you want to grow? Up. So you got to turn and start growing up. You ever seen a plant like that? Like driving down the road? Yeah, on riverbanks. And so what happens is that's a response to gravity, and those cells will elongate and start growing up. Same kind of thing. And then another type of tropism is thigmotropism, Thigmo. Thigmotropism is a growth response to touch. So if you've ever seen like grapevines have these little tendrils that go out and they grab a hold of stuff and then they twist around it. A lot of vines do this. And basically, so what they're doing is they're kind of just throwing out feelers everywhere, and then they finally grab a hold of something, they grab a hold of it. And the curly part of that, what's occurring there? Why does it curl? If you have a rope, like you throw it out and lasso something, and then you twist it up, what's going to happen? It's going to hold on to it, but it's going to get what? It's going to get tighter, it's going to get shorter too. So as you twist it up, it gets shorter, and that's how the plant draws itself to that. It's like I said, it can't contract muscles like we have. So, but as it turns it and twists those tendrils, then it will draw that plant closer to it. So that's how those vines work. And basically, they're just kind of out throwing feelers everywhere until they grab a hold of something. All right, next part. This was first determined in the experiment by Charles Darwin. Actually, let's go through and look at this, but I want to go through the second part here first. The absence of sunlight. So on the second part here, Isabel, start us off.
The absence of sunlight is responsible for flowering in plants. Flowering is determined primarily by genetics and proteins or enzyme activation. These proteins, called phytochromes, essentially act as a biological clock for telling time.
Okay, so phyto means?
Right.
Well, actually, in this case, that's a different, yeah, so this case, it's just like plant, and chromes are referring to pigments. So this is talking about pigments that are sensitive really to light. And so this is kind of, I guess a loose way of saying this would be like a way that plants can see. I don't know, that's a rough analogy there. Anyway, and also, it says telling time. Basically, it's telling time by how much light is absorbing. So you know how much light's out, and so it can determine what's going on in the environment. Okay? Now, sunlight can cause a shape change in the proteins. Remember that whole signal transduction pathway thing? This shape allows for the activation of transcription and translation genes associated with making leaves into flowers and by adding different wavelengths of reflective pigments. So basically, this part of the notes is talking about when do plants know how to flower? Like in my snow video that I posted yesterday, we were out in the snow plain and we found some, they're not buttercups. What are those things called? I always call them what? Daffodils. Yeah. So there were some daffodils that were in bloom. Have y'all seen any around that were in bloom? You know, the yellow ones? Anyway, so we had a few in bloom, and I was, if you think about like what determines when they bloom, okay? So primarily what's going to happen is they're determining the amount of light that's going on during the day, okay? So turn over to, let's look at 841 real quick here before we move on. Let's look at this Darwin experiment. Temperature can play a role in the enzymes, but I think the main thing that's determining it is light. Because, I mean, if you think about temperature, like they were flowering yesterday and it's been pretty cold. So now I would say enzyme activity probably ramps up with temperature, but usually temperature also has a close relationship with the amount of light. Good question. All right, so on page 841, Darwin's experiment. Now, Darwin wanted to see what's causing a plant stem to bend, okay? So if you notice here on the first part, he removed the tip of the plant, okay? And the plant, so the light's coming in from one side, he removed the tip of a plant, and did it grow toward the light? No. In the next one, he covered the tip of the plant, well, I still got the light over here, he covered it by an opaque cap, and what did the plant do? So the light couldn't come through the little cap that was on it. It stayed straight. Then he covered the tip of the plant with a transparent cap, so it's clear, and the plant grew, okay? So he's figuring out there's something in the tip of that plant that's causing it to grow and bend. And then the last part, the side of curvature covered by opaque shield. So he covered the rest of the plant with an opaque shield except for the tip, and still that tip kind of grew toward the light. So there's something in the tip of the plant that's causing growth. In the last part, there's another Boysen-Jensen experiment here. Phototropism occurs when the tip is separated by a permeable barrier, but not by an impermeable barrier. And this is a pretty interesting experiment where, this is the one on the bottom here, where basically they took the tip of a plant, they cut it off, they put an impermeable barrier where nothing could go through it, and that plant still stays straight. But when they separated it by a permeable barrier, I don't know if they used some kind of agar or what they used here, and put the tip back on top, when those signals went down through there, it caused it to grow. So that's kind of definitive proof that there's something in the tip of that plant causing it to move toward the light. Okay? You guys turn over to 853 real quick. 853. Let's see here. Okay. Long night and short night plants. Now, I don't know, have you ever heard of this phenomenon? Long night, short night plants? Okay, I didn't think so. Let's go through and talk about this. Sunlight can change. Okay, we talked about signal transduction, and we talked about phytochromes, how plants sense light. Long night flowers require long, uninterrupted periods of night to flower, such as seen in the fall and winter. So long night flowers, if you look on 853, also known as short day plants. I think long night is a better description though, to be honest with you. This one right here. So it's showing the length of daylight and dark. And in order for that plant to flower, what did it have to have? It had to have a certain uninterrupted period of darkness. You can see the one in the middle is the only one that flowered, right? Now, that limit that it needs is called the critical limit. It's in bold there in your notes, okay? So it has to go past a certain amount of uninterrupted darkness in order to flower. Now, the short night flowers also, they require a short period of night to flower. The duration needed is called the critical limit. So in this case, you can see here, let's see, on the bottom, we actually see two of these short night flowers that are flowering. One when it had a short period of night. So when would you think this would normally happen? What time of year? So, yeah, it could be late spring or summer when the days are getting longer. And you also see you had one flower when it looks like there's very little light, but there was some kind of light going on during the nighttime, and it flowered. What could cause that?
It stimulates a short night. I read the explanation beside the.
No, I mean, what could that light be that stimulated that? Okay, it could be artificial light around your home, a motion sensor goes off or something like that. It could be lightning. Those could all be like interrupters in that cycle, okay? So it has to have that long uninterrupted period of, or you have to go past a certain point where you only have so much darkness, and it's going to produce those flowers. Now, I'll give you an example of this. So my parents had this like weird, funny looking cactus plant. I don't know what it is. I can't remember the name. And it's like never flowered. My mother had it for 10 or 15 years. And they go on a trip in early February one year to Yellowstone on like a snowmobile trip. And they come back and this plant has flowered. What happened? It's never flowered before, but when they go on this trip, they come back and it's flowered.
It's because the lights in their house are on all the time and it's interrupting the night vision.
Yes, so they were around, and so the lights were always on, and so there was only a short period of darkness, and so it never got that like long period it needed. But when they were gone in February, they had the lights turned off in the house. And so then you got this long uninterrupted period, and so it caused flowering. And so when they got back, all these pretty orange flowers on it. And so it was because it got past that critical limit that it needed of darkness. Okay? Does that make sense? Now you know.
It makes sense. I just don't get why that would need darkness.
Well, what else is going to signal it? You're still thinking of it from a temperature perspective, right?
I'm like, would light not stimulate flowering? Or
Well, which one are you thinking of here?
like the long night one?
The long night ones. So you've got to go past this critical limit of uninterrupted darkness. So that's only going to happen in the winter. What were you saying?
I'm just not understanding why we need darkness to flower. Like, would it not need light to stimulate?
Well, it needs a little bit of light for photosynthesis, I guess, but it doesn't need it for the actual flower production. Because those are just modified leaves. I mean, so you got a little bit of light. Not many plants do that. But if you go outside and look around, you'll see some things in the late fall or even wintertime or early spring that are flowering. And so that's just the time that they do best. Like we said, daffodils right now. So it's still pretty short in terms of daylight. And so once they get to that limit, then that's when they know to flower. And I guess they've evolved that mechanism because that's the time that's best for them in terms of production and survival. All right. Transpiration. Transpiration is water loss. Turn to page 789 in your books. I hate talking this much, but we are behind, so we're just going to have to bear with it today. So on 789, we talked about transpiration pull. There are a variety of factors that are involved in transpiration. Like I said, tomorrow, hopefully all the plants that I bought yesterday thawed out and they're still alive. We can hope. And tomorrow we'll get started on Transpiration Lab. And basically what you guys are going to be doing, I'm going to kind of run through this part here. You guys are going to have some different experimental factors you're going to be looking at. Wind, humidity, dark, you've got a control, and then you've got a bright light, I think. So you're going to have 5 different factors that you're going to be testing. We'll be in groups, and you'll have a couple different ones each probably, different plants that you're looking at. And so each day you're going to be looking at transpiration. Transpiration occurs where? In the leaves of a plant, right? In the stomata, yeah. So in the holes in the underside, primarily in the underside of the leaves. So basically what you're going to do is you're going to take your plant, you're going to put a little baggie around the bottom of it so that no water loss can occur there, and then the only thing you're going to have exposed is the leaves. And so every day you're going to measure the plant to see how much water it lost. And so you're going to see how those factors affect transpiration in that plant. All right, we said guard cells control that. They're the things that look like little kissy lips. You can see them on page 791. Guard cells are interesting in the way they function, and it's a little bit backwards from the way that I would think they would function. So it's a little confusing. So when water goes in the guard cells, what happens to them? They get bigger, they swell. Does the stomata open or close? It opens. So I would think, they get bigger and it's going to close up. But actually, they get bigger, almost like a curvy shaped balloon, and they make that opening. And when they deflate, they just kind of fall back together and close that opening. Okay? So, and that's due to water loss. And it makes sense if you're a plant, because If you've got less water, then you want that to close up and not lose any more water, okay? So, how do plants get water to move in and out of the stoma, though? That's a good question. So if we look here on 791, you can see there's a roll of potassium ions. Basically what the plant is doing, if you look at it here on 791 at the bottom, what's the plant doing to get water to move in those guard cells? It can't pump water into the guard cells, but it can pump what? Potassium. So the plant, this is super duper smart for plants, right? So we think we're smart. So plants pump potassium in the guard cells. In doing so, they make it more hypertonic. And water moves from hypo to hyper, right? I remember that the isotonic, hypertonic. So as they move more potassium in there, water's going to move from where it's more highly to where it's less concentrated. And so that's going to make water also flow in and follow it to try to equal out the water in the surrounding areas. And in doing so, it fills them up, it opens that stoma. And so the same thing, you pump that potassium out, water follows it out, they deflate, it comes back together, it closes that stoma, okay? So it's just using the pumping of those ions to create that movement of water. Similar to what happens in like plant roots, you create this like graded potential so that as you go in the plant, you've got more and more water flowing in because you've got more and more ions as you go into the plant. And basically that creates this like movement of water from outside the plant inward. All right, let's see. And it's important, the catch-22 for plants, remember, is you've got to have the stomata open for CO2 to come in. So even if it's hot and dry outside, if it's very hot and dry for a long period of time, you run into this conundrum if you're a plant. You've got to have CO2 for photosynthesis. But if you open them up for too long, then you're going to lose water and you're going to dry out and die. So there's like, pick your poison almost on these when it gets very, very hot and dry. All right, the next thing, we talked about C3, C4, and CAM plants. Do y'all remember just really quickly, C4 plants, what's their adaptation to prevent too much water loss? They have a specialized structure in the specialized group of cells that only the Calvin cycle can take place in there. Y'all should write this down since you've forgotten it. The bundle sheath, y'all remember that? Remember, there's a special place where photosynthesis takes place in C4 plants called the bundle sheath. That's the only place that the Calvin cycle can happen. And then in CAM plants, remember, those are like your cacti. What's their special adaptation to preventing water loss? Yes, so they're taking in CO2 at night, and then they're converting it back to CO2 during the day. That way they don't have to open their stomata during the day and lose a lot of water. Good. The next page. Man, there's a lot of notes. All right, sunlight, temperature, and water in animals. Water loss by animals is also in need of regulation, referred to as osmoregulation. Remember, osmosis is talking about water, so it's controlling water movement. This is a part of homeostasis, maintaining a stable environment. Water loss can be from sweating, panting, breathing, or waste removal. Now, I will say this, if you're talking about animals, they have special adaptations for living in the desert. Like most desert animals, when they go poop, what happens? What does it look like? Y'all seen a desert animal poop? What would you think it looked like? Pretty dry, yeah. I mean, I would imagine it'd feel pretty rough coming out. So you want to be able to remove as much moisture as you can so that you're not losing anyways. And I would also think that, I don't know, I don't have the data before me, but I'm pretty sure that their urine is also much more concentrated than ours. And so, that rooster's getting wound up. So that you also prevent water loss that way. A lot of desert animals, they get their water from their food sources. They may not even get it from drinking something. They may just get it from food on a lot of occasions. Anyway, water loss, yeah, we talked about that. Removal of ammonia. So this is another big one we talked about earlier, but you really need to know and understand. Ammonia, NH3, you've got to get rid of it. It's a byproduct of cell respiration when essentially you're using proteins for energy. You cleave off that amine group and it turns into ammonia, And so mammals and amphibians get rid of it in the form of urine. We mix that ammonia with some water. In birds and reptiles, they get rid of it in the form of uric acid, which is that white stuff on top of bird poop. It's a much more, and just think about it, in terms of water loss, birds and reptiles, they've got it figured out. They're not losing a lot of water when they poop or pee, right? And so that's all kind of mixed together and it's in a paste. And then, what else? Fish can secrete it directly as ammonia in the water. So those are all important in terms of getting rid of that ammonia that's toxic. Remember, what organ in our body helps get rid of that? Kidneys. And if your kidneys aren't working, what happens? You die. You have to go on dialysis or yeah. So it's a very important bodily function to get rid of that ammonia. All right, let's keep going here. Sweating and panting, some different ways of cooling off. I'm not going to spend too much time on that. If you skip down to part 3B on evaporative cooling, this is the way that we regulate body temperature. We sweat, so as we sweat, that pulls. So there's a lot of heat found in those water bonds. That water is moved to the surface and then evaporates. That heat gets pulled away from our bodies. And if you're in an area somewhere like where it's very dry and hot, you can really feel this because it evaporates very quickly. Now, if you live where we do in the summertime, it's so humid, you can just be soaked all the time and you may be really hot. And the problem there is, why are you still soaked? It's humid outside, so there's not a lot of difference between the humidity outside and the sweat on your body. So evaporation is much less. When you have like desert humidity and you have sweat all over your body, that water is going to evaporate much more quickly because you've got a bigger gradient that you're going through. Anyway, let's see here. Endotherms. So we're going to distinguish two types of animals here. Endotherms are organisms that maintain an internal body temperature. You might have called them in the past what? Warm-blooded, hot-blooded, whatever. Ectotherms are things that get their temperature from their external environment. You probably would have called them, although in the summertime, they're probably not that, blood's not that cold, right? It's just whatever the temperature is outside. So yeah, they regulate very differently than we do, where we maintain an internal body temperature, which is beneficial for them in what way? If you're using the surrounding environment to regulate your temperature, you're not having to what? Yeah, so you can go off of a lot less food than an organism that has to maintain a certain body temperature, for sure. Number 4, countercurrent heat exchange. Turn to page 880. Countercurrent heat exchange, they talk about this in dolphins, and also they've got some birds here. You know, my wife asked me this one day. Maybe it was my kids. I can't remember. She said, you know, how do their feet not freeze off like our chickens? Because they don't have any feathers on them, and they're exposed, but they still have blood going through them. And I thought, that's a good question, and then I forgot about this. Basically, countercurrent heat exchange is let me give you the book definition here. The transfer of heat between fluids that are flowing in opposite directions. Arteries and veins are located next to each other. Because blood flow through the arteries and veins are in opposite direction, this arrange allows heat exchange to be remarkably efficient. Warm blood moves from the body cord into the arteries and transfers heat into the colder blood returning from the extremities of the veins. More importantly, heat is transferred along the entire length of the exchanger, maximizing the rate of heat exchange. Now, this would be good if you're in one of these very cold environments and you have extremities. I don't know, really have a good version of this. I don't know that we have as much of, if our arteries and veins are as close. And a lot of times, if you're not careful, what happens to your fingers and toes? They get very, very. I was watching Alone the other day, this survival show, and this girl's toes started getting frostbite. And so if you're an animal who's exposed all the time, this is something you would have to be adapted to, or you wouldn't do well with frostbite because you wouldn't live very long. Now, humans, we've adapted to this because we use, in cold environments, clothes, right? We have boots and gloves, and we have fire and things of that nature. but animals in the environment do not have the benefit of that. So that is one way of regulating their heat. Let's see. And the last part probably here, we need to know structure in the brain that controls temperature is your hypothalamus. Helps to regulate your temperature. I think we mentioned it briefly when we discussed the flu and how your body, how a fever works in your body. The thermostat gets turned up, and so basically it's a way of tricking your body into heating up to giving you chills. You feel like you're cold when really you're not, and you know the more your body shakes and undergoes like a higher rate of metabolism, the more you warm up. All right. Any questions there? Super. Let's go to part 1 of behavioral ecology. So, how organisms behave. Turn to 1134. All right. There's a lot of interesting behavioral stuff, and we don't have much time. We're going to run through, and we'll hit a couple of high points here, though. All right. DNA is responsible for the blueprint information for making proteins and enzymes. Now, behavior is an interesting thing because, you know, we think of behaviors as mostly learned, right? You learn stuff from people you're around or things that you see. But there are also behaviors that are inborn, like what?
Breathing.
Okay, breathing. You don't have to think about that one. What else? What's something you do when you're just born that you know to do that you've never had to learn?
Crying.
Cry. That's not what I was going for. That's another one. What else? Nursing. Good, right? So,
I was gonna say eating.
yeah, well, I mean, that's basically the same thing. So, some behaviors are experiences and some are within your genetics. And let's go down to innate behaviors. Innate means you are born with it. Babies crying, dogs barking. These are things like chickens crowing. Like those chickens in the courtyard right there, they have never been around any other chickens, right? We had them, we threw them out there, they're out there. The hens know to cackle when they lay eggs. They all talk to one another. The rooster knows to crow. He also knows how to mate behavior with the hens. He knows all of that. He didn't have to watch anybody else, right? So those are all innate behaviors that are inborn in order for those organisms to function properly. Skip down to fixed action potentials. Oh, I like this one. And we don't really have enough time for all this, but we're going to work through it. This is on 1134 in your book. Okay. A behavior that once it is initiated must be carried through to some fixed conclusion, triggered by a stimulus. For example, we don't know that one. A moth hit by a bat radar plays dead. So remember, bats have like echolocation and they're sending out signals. So a lot of moths have this response when they hear that. Basically, they just like fall and play dead to try to avoid that. Y'all are all familiar with this last one here. Baby's hand grasping an object put in its palm. So anytime you put your like finger in a baby's palm, like it'll grasp around you. Okay, that's another one of those fixed action potentials. Survival. These are all survival traits that are helpful and beneficial. Let's skip down to the next part. Reproductive success. So the better you are at these behaviors, the better you are at reproducing, growing, living, reproducing, and passing on your traits. I'll give you an example. When I was growing up, we had cows. My dad still raises cows, and sometimes you would have a calf that would not nurse. Like it didn't know how to nurse, didn't know where to nurse. Like I remember sometimes they would go to the front of the cow where there were no udders. It was utterly ridiculous. And like a lot of times you'd have to get the cow inside like the pen, and we'd have to tie one of her legs with a rope so she wouldn't kick us. Tie her head up to the side of the fence so she wouldn't run away. And then you'd have to get the calf. I remember this was usually me. I'd have to get the calf over there, and my dad would be squirting milk in its mouth, and the calf would be like, I don't know what to do with it. And then you'd eventually just have to take the calf, and I'd have to bottle feed it. I would name it, get very close to it, and then my dad would sell it, and then somebody would eat it.
Matt, guess what?
What happened?
My uncle owns a cow farm, or he works on one.
All right.
And a few weeks ago, they had like his first.
Oh, they had twins.
Yes, they did. They had twins.
Your mother sent me a picture of that, I think.
I was so excited.
It was very
They named them Elsa and Anna because they were born in the snowstorm.
Twins are a very exciting part of cow birth.
My
Anyway.
grandfather had to feed a calf on
Oh yeah.
Some named
A bottle fed my share of. We got a couple more minutes here. All right. My share of animals. I mean, what's even worse when
Sheriff.
they probably need it. Man, I mean, some of these things. And normally, like natural selection would take out the animals that don't know what they're doing. But when you're breeding animals, sometimes it just happens, and you have to try to get them to survive the best you can. Let's see, natural selection. Skip on down to the foraging theory. Optimum foraging theory is a cost analysis of energy input versus energy yield. Now, you guys, have y'all studied cost-benefit analysis in economics? Y'all heard of that term? Cost-benefit analysis, you have? It's not what?
We don't have.
Only seniors do.
Whatever. What is it? History? Something? Gov, whatever. Yeah. Okay. Close enough. And so basically, organisms also have to do this. Is the energy that you're inputting worth the stuff that you're getting out? Same thing happens. Like I said, I always watch these survival shows. You've got to think about, is the energy that you're putting into getting this food worth the amount of energy that you're going to get out of it? If you're walking 5 miles for a handful of berries, then that's not probably worth the energy that you had to put into it. Okay. Tomorrow, let's pick up on the crow and whelk experiment on 1144. And we'll talk about how crows are smarter than most people in the lunchroom.